We have first the coordinators. The coordinators.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have the habit of hammering this loud, but our guest is already here with us, and I have the pleasure of welcoming to our meeting today the current President in Office of the Council, Mr. Maurizio Martina, who is the Italian Minister of Agriculture, Food and Forestry Policies, and who leads the Council of Ministers of Agriculture. We already had the pleasure to receive the Minister 1 year ago when he came to us to present the Universal Exhibition, which will take place in Milan in 2015. And I'm sure he will give us today the latest update about the preparation of this important event. But I hope he will also inform us on the plans and priorities of the Italian presidency, which comes at a very exceptional moment, a difficult moment, when the new European Commission is being formed. During our meeting this morning, I also congratulated Italy, because the new High Representative is your colleague from the same government. So I think at this difficult moment of the embargo and very important talks on international trade and the new rules with the US and other countries, that this meeting is particularly important. Well, the situation is such nowadays that the world affairs influence the situation in Europe to a large extent. So we're happy to welcome you here, and I will now give you the floor. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Grazie a tutti, buongiorno.
Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. Thank you very much, Chair, honoured members of the committee. I'd like, first of all, to thank you for this important opportunity you've given me to put forward the programme of the Italian presidency. I'd also like to thank you because this meeting gives us an opportunity to launch a first level of important dialogue on a number of issues and themes which we want to discuss and will discuss in the forthcoming days. The work of this committee is of extreme importance for the Council, and we intend launching immediately an intense and profitable debate with you on all of the issues on the table. The experience has shown us that it's when the three union institutions work together efficiently and harmoniously that we actually get the results that are what the European citizen wants to see. When we look at the recent reform of the CAP, the last legislature, that was the fruit of the high-level work that we undertake between the three community institutions. And this allows me to thank once again Paolo de Castro for the excellent work that he did on this and on other issues. Now I'd like to perhaps present some of the key issues of the working programme of the Italian presidency in the agricultural sector. It's a programme where we've already started to work, and indeed did start working since last July. I would start by underlining, as I said to begin with, that the reform of the CAP has been an important success for the Parliament, the Council and the Commission. It's also now necessary to continue the activity of actually defining what the specific measures are required in order to complete the process. Particularly, I'm talking here about delegated acts, the delegated acts which are foreseen in the Lisbon Treaty. We intend winding up the examination of these acts in the forthcoming weeks. From the part of the Council, I don't see any particular difficulties, and I do hope that we will manage to get an accelerated process in place here. Amongst these dossiers, we're currently looking in the Council and examining the proposal for a regulation on the reform of organic agriculture. Here we're talking about a very important dossier. It's a particularly sensitive dossier for all of the member states. Organic agriculture is a growing segment and of particular importance for all the European agricultural sector. And this is a particularly important phase at the moment. We have to have an in-depth debate between the community institutions in order to come up with a result which will be the best from all possible points of view. As you already know, after the presentation of the proposal from the Commission, there is a technical discussion in the Council, and we've already looked at 2/3 of the regulation. At the same time, in the Council in July, which is the first one we actually took the chairmanship of, there was an opportunity for people to put forward their first points of view during a political debate on the main issues within the text. Because this is a review of the regulation, there were a number of key issues that were put forward as regards some specific issues in the text. We are going to do our absolute best with your support in order to try and find a way to share our concerns and issues in order to put forward the dossier and push it forward as quickly as possible. From this point of view, and if the negotiations allow us, we would hope to get a compromise text under the presidency. Another sensitive and very important dossier looks at the reviewing the regime for subsidies for school and milk for schools. Work's already been undertaken by the Greek presidency, but as indeed you probably already know, the Council has already stated a number of their concerns on the legal base put forward by the Commission. Now, our intention is to continue trying to push forward the proposal, and we've already set up dates for a number of key working groups within the Council. Now, we know that on this dossier we need to make a huge effort in order to ensure that the system works as best as possible in the eyes of the European citizen, in order to ensure that we try and get the European citizen on board as much as possible, and also try and get the agricultural world on board in order to ensure the system works as well as possible. It's therefore very important to discuss with you in a very direct and efficient manner. Our objective is to try and get a general approach which will allow us in the future to speed up the timetable and to try and get to a compromise between the institutions in such a way to ensure that the text is approved as quickly as possible. Another very important issue that we've got on the table is the future of the milk sector. Now, on this issue, as we know, the debate has occurred at all levels between the institutions and has been running for quite some time. Last June, the Commission put forward a report on the situation in the sector and put forward the so-called milk packet. The Council has also had a debate where that report was discussed. Now, we're very aware of the fact that this is extremely important and a very sensitive issue, as indeed we also know that the milk sector is a fundamental strategic sector. The reform of the CAP and the milk packet has introduced a number of innovative elements in order to deal with the market crisis and to try and improve the functioning of the entire production chain. Nevertheless, the presidency is very aware of how delicate the issue is, and particularly in terms of the winding up of the milk quotas in the upcoming years, and we're going to monitor the situation very closely. Another important issue for us is the issue of a very difficult issue of food security in terms of the adequate availability of food and the adequate distribution of food, and its fair and equitable distribution, especially in terms of the strategic problems that we have in terms of raw materials across the world. Now, this is a global issue. It's something that's being talked about all over the world at the moment, and in fact it's going to be one of the key geopolitical challenges for the future, and it's something where the European Union also has got to play a key role. And it's something that we are going to deal with in the upcoming weeks and months. It's extremely relevant and has to pay a great deal of attention to it. It's also an issue that's going to be at the very middle of the Universal Exposition in Milan in 2015. Feed the Planet, Energy for Life, which is going to be an enormously fruitful opportunity for the entire sector in the European Union. It's going to be a great opportunity, as has already just been mentioned, for Europe to talk to the rest of the world on this particular food challenge for the future. We also need to look, of course, at the future challenges that we're going to have to deal with. The Italian presidency wants to put this debate at the very centre, at the very heart of the European political debate. And for that reason, we've decided to concentrate on the issue of food security and to bring it into the informal meeting of the Council, which will take place in Milan at the end of September. In terms of the global issues that we face, there's also going to be attention paid to the trade negotiations which are currently being undertaken, because their agriculture plays a very important and decisive part. For this reason, we think it's very important that we continue to follow very closely the development of the international agreements there, both at a multilateral level, for example, the WTO and the post-Bali agenda, as well as bilateral activities. In particular, we're going to look at the updating within the Council of the evolution of the free trade negotiations, those that are running and those that have already been wound up, in particular those with the United States, Canada, with the Asian countries, African countries and South America. We're going to put at the very centre of our debate the impact and the consequences that these agreements will have on the European agricultural activity, and the need to have reciprocal systems set up, which actually includes the recognition of the European system of the identification of geographical origins. In this context, we are going to get a constructive discussion going with the Commission. Another two issues which we're going to deal with in our strategic vision for the future of the agricultural sector, and some where the Italian presidency wants to put a priority, is the review of the Europe 2020 strategy and the climate and energy strategy 2030. When we talk about the former, we are going to get a discussion going with the agricultural sector looking at the mid-term impact of the Europe 2020 strategy, following on from the communication from the Commission in March. The objective here is to try and get a joint vision going and to think together on a future strategy. In particular, the Presidency is going to try and centre the debate on innovation and the job opportunities that exist for young farmers. And we're going to look at that in particular during the Agricultural Council in October. This is a specific moment where we can actually look at these issues. The results of the debate will then feed into the discussions in the General Affairs Council on the reviewing of the strategy, and will make up one of the main contributions from the agricultural sector to this discussion, which will be put forward to the Commission in March 2015. When we think about the climate and energy strategy 2030, we fully recognise the importance of the reduction of greenhouse gases on the part of the agricultural sector as a contribution from the agricultural sector to try and get to a significant reduction. For this reason, the Agricultural Council will launch a debate on this issue when they have the meeting in October. Now, the outcome of this debate will serve to feed into the broader discussions in the Environment Council, which will have the lead responsibility in view of preparing a decision for the European Council at the end of October. We're very concerned to get the work going with all other relevant committees in the European Parliament in order to ensure that we actually reach the targets that we're setting. There are other important dossiers which are going to be dealt with during the Italian presidency within the framework of the Council. I'm particularly referring here to the proposal for regulation on the protection mechanism against harmful organisms for plants and also the zootechnic package. These are very important dossiers, strategic dossiers, which are actually also looking at trying to simplify the legal framework to try and reduce administration and to reinforce the competitiveness of our businesses. The Italian presidency will examine with great interest all of the amendments and positions that come forward from the European Parliament, and we're absolutely confident that we'll be able to get constructive negotiations going in the future. In terms of looking at the proposal of the regulation on the protection measures against harmful organisms for plants and the package on zootechnic legislation, well, this is something where we've got to look at the increase of risk in this sector due to the dissemination of new harmful organisms and sicknesses which results from the globalization of trade and climate change. Now, in this sense, the proposals which have been put forward in terms of new instruments to evaluate the health risks has to lead to better control and better surveillance in our countries, and also to try and ensure that we can intervene better in terms of the breeding grounds of these new harmful organisms. There's a working group from the Council, and that's going to be looking closely at the technical examination proposals, which is based on the compromise text from the Greek presidency. When we look at the new proposal that's come forward for the package on zootechnic legislation, the Commission intends structuring the entire legislation horizontally and not vertically for specific species. We would also like to introduce some specific sensitive changes, organisational changes, in terms to reduce the area of public legislation, which obviously is very important when we look at the smaller breeds that are at risk of disappearing. The presidency hopes to finish the first reading of the document and put forward a dossier which will identify the areas where we share our points of view. When we look at the very sensitive question of the GMOs, last June the Environment Council came up with a political agreement on the changes to the directive looking at the specific emission of OGMs in the environment. The proposal will allow member states to limit or to forbid in their own territory, fully or in part, the cultivation of these GMOs that have been authorised at the European level. This is based on a number of different motivations, such as environmental issues or health issues, which are already foreseen in the authorisation system. The agreement that we've got, I think, is a proper balance between the competencies of the Union and the national competency. In line with subsidiarity, we are confident that the process of negotiation with the European Parliament, which we will launch as a presidency next week, together with our colleagues from our Ministers of the Environment and Health, it means that we will come to an agreement, I hope, by the end of the year. To wind up, allow me to state once again a problem which has come up very recently in the past few weeks, and here I'm particularly talking about the fruit crisis and the Russian embargo on some of our food products. Here we're talking about two very important problems where the Italian presidency has worked immediately and very hard together with the Commission, and as you already know, has already adopted, within the possibility given to them by delegated acts, a number of measures in order to support those areas which have been struck by the crisis. Allow me here to thank Commissioner Cholos and his staff for the very rapid response and the corresponding support given to support farmers. Reforming the CAP in this particular context has shown that we need to have the necessary instruments in order to deal with crises like this. But it might also be the moment, the opportunity to launch some thinking on the need to reinforce these tools. In this context discussion, with the European Parliament is, from my point of view, absolutely essential. The Extraordinary Council has been called for next Friday, and that will look at the measures that need to be adopted in order to deal with this particular crisis. To wind up, what I've tried to do here is to give a brief presentation of the main issues and the main dossiers which are going to be dealt with and looked at during the Italian presidency. Obviously, I'm at your disposal, as is my staff, in order to give you all the information and all the clarifications that you need. Chair, members of the committee, I really hope that from this meeting here we may see the birth of a very close cooperation, an efficient cooperation, in order to get going the dialogue that we need to get going in order to deal with the issues that we confront on all of the questions and all of the problems which are fundamental in the sector, especially, as I say, in this very sensitive period for European agriculture, in order to fulfil a mandate as best as possible. This is what animates us, this is what encourages us, and I think that that's the spirit which is going to animate just now and also in the forthcoming weeks and months. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękujemy panu ministrowi za...
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for this broad presentation of the working program of the presidency. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask you for one thing. First, the coordinators, 2 minutes each, then a reply from the Minister, whom I am very sorry to also ask to be brief. We have almost 20 requests for the floor. Everyone will get a minute each, and at the end, another reply from the Minister. So please do not be offended when I raise this gavel and when I ask you to be disciplined. Recently, we had a situation where somebody took it personally. Next time, we will schedule a longer time for the meeting. Usually an hour was sufficient. So, without taking too long, Mr. Dess.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Minister Martina, for coming to the Agri Committee. I hope we'll be able to work together very well during the Italian presidency. There's just a couple of points that I'd like to bring up in the 2 minutes I have available to me, and then colleagues will say other things. Thank you very much for bringing up the school milk and school fruit issue. There are different views on this, but it is necessary, I think, that we bear in mind the fact that this is something that has been made available in schools. We've got an expiry of quotas next year, and my colleague is going to be saying a few more words about the position Latvia finds itself in, a small country which has supplied Russia, and I would ask for support for finding a solution to that. One thing I thought was positive was food security, an issue that you mentioned, and you mentioned strategic stocks. I think, although people have different views on this, it is important for us to put that issue at the centre of our thoughts. With regard to Canada, Mercosur, and other countries and agreements is concerned, as of 2010, we had to have made a decision, and the Commission was supposed only to allow agricultural imports if various standards for animal protection, etc., are upheld. There were 435 votes in favour of that. And I've got a question seen from a German point of view about the plant. Seeds. And I'd like to know what exactly the situation in Council is with regard to seeds.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Castro, our former chairman and also a former Minister of Agriculture. Go ahead.
Grazie Presidente. Ma caro... Thank you. Minister, I'll be very brief, only 2 minutes. I'd just like to mention a few points, and I dare say my colleagues will go into detail on others. First of all, institutional cooperation. As you yourself said, that's one of the key points in the CAP reform, was of course one of the first test benches for a new relationship between Council and Parliament. And recently, in the crisis caused by problems with the block of exports to Russia, we hope that Parliament, Commission and Council will work very hard together so that this works out for the good of our farmers. The initial reaction by the Commission, we'd like to thank you for that, and the Parliament and Commission, Council cooperated and did a good job on that. So now, on that subject, may I underscore a very important and sensitive point, and that's delegated acts, which you mentioned. We'll be working on a draft for wine in a while, and there's a lot of concerns out there because, sadly, planting rights, as you said, and Parliament is ruled out of this issue, the way it's being dealt with. We can do some work towards delegated acts, but when it comes to executive acts or implementing acts, we can't do anything. We have to trust in you because, you know, we've had political agreement on wine and it's been interpreted in different ways. At the end of the day, we're going to get the status quo. On fruit in schools, fruit and milk in schools, it's important there in the debate in Council to see this as part of a major plan on food education. That's what it's really about. Otherwise, we will end up with a situation in which fruit and milk are the only products that will get that little help. That's not why the campaign was started. It's essentially a food education campaign and could include other produce as well. It would also be very good if we could get a position from the Italian presidency on the trade agreement with the US. There's more and more concerns emerging here, critical points, and they're legitimate concerns as well. The food standards that we've achieved, we want to maintain. But as my colleague has just said, there are tremendous opportunities for Europe here as well. So, you know, we need to go forward with the right balance. Thank you.
Microphone, please. Mr. Wojciechowski as Deputy Coordinator for the ECR. Thank you, Chairman. 3 issues that I would like to mention. The first one is the Russian embargo and the huge crisis that affects a lot of countries in Europe. With astonishment is it that we see that the crisis reserve is not being used as provided in Article 25, which is 400 million euros. And I really can barely imagine a more urgent situation to use these funds. Whatever was actually used by the Commission is insufficient for the farmers, so we have to use this reserve. So that is my appeal to the Italian presidency. The second thing is the penalties for exceeding the milk quotas. I'm a lawyer, so I know that if something is no longer a crime, the penalty is also abolished. Metaphorically, a little bit. But what is the point in penalizing farmers where the quota system runs out and there is no damage done because the overall European quota was not exceeded? So I appeal to the presidency to take initiative on this as well. And the third issue, we have the the swine fever, the African swine fever that approaches us from the east. The Polish government is unable to manage it, and I do not say this as a criticism. I just say this to ask for help, for assistance. In a year or two, the problem will affect the whole EU, and it might basically kill our pig breeding. So Lithuania, Poland are the countries who are most threatened, but basically it's a threat for the whole of Europe. So these are the three issues that I would like to recommend for the Italian presidency. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Häusling, you have the floor.
2 minuty.
2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your visit. I'm going to go straight down to business. You mentioned the trade relations, and I think the Commission and the Council have said to citizens that they're going to finally bring about transparency both in TTIP and CETA. We don't have that transparency, however. We discuss them, and even we members are only speculating. That can't endure that position. I think we need to have these things discussed in a public sphere. This is something we constantly call for, and yet nothing changes. Obviously, we have to contemplate our position given the crisis that we're experiencing in the agricultural sector at the moment. And it's not just the Russian trade embargo that applies here. It goes beyond milk. Milk is the area where the crisis has really come to public attention. But there are other areas, so we need to come up with answer. What happens after the ending of the quota? Prices are already in free fall, and if we don't get substantive answers to these problems, we're going to find that that sector is going to be thrown into crisis. With the Russian embargo, we have a commitment to aid, to come to the support of farmers who live in areas neighbouring the border and who need help, but we have to think about whether it is a good idea for us to have concentrated on milk exports. Certainly, we need to think about our own dependency, which isn't a good point. On eco measures, I think this is good. I think it's important that we take green issues seriously, and I think that this is a topic we need to move forward with quickly to make sure that this is something that does get solved. One final word. I think, despite the crisis, climate protection is something that shouldn't go to the back of the queue when we're discussing agriculture. It's something that we need to keep constantly at the forefront of our minds when we negotiate. Agriculture and climate protection need to be taken as one element.
Thank you, Ms. Senra. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Buenos días.
Thank you, and good morning. I'd like to start by saying that the Russian embargo has shown how the responsible action by the European Union has made this risk worse for the farmers of Europe simply to serve the interests of the United States. Secondly, we are also seeing the risks of a CAP, which, thanks to more recent reforms, and there have been a lot of them, is now seemingly focused entirely on exports with no concern for the fate of our farmers producing for their local markets. It's not serious, it's not responsible to have a CAP which is all about exports and not about the internal market. In the effects on the dairy market of these recent removal of quotas can be seen in the price crisis which we had even before the Russian embargo. We think that the free trade agreements will simply be another step in the description of Europe's farmers and of peasant agriculture, small-scale agriculture. Despite the promises we've had from the President of Council, we have no sign of a CAP that takes real account of the needs of the environment, the producers and the consumers. So there are two things that need to be got to work. The first of those is the negotiations on the free trade agreement ongoing. And secondly, some attempt to deal with the problems we're living through, and a new CAP which, as I said, meets the needs of Europe's citizens and farmers, not those of the big multinational corporations. Thank you.
Yes, it's actually good afternoon now, Minister. A couple of things. The first is the Ebola virus in West Africa is now in everybody's minds or in everybody's newspapers. That is associated with bushmeat or snakes and monkeys and things like that that are not generally eaten in Europe, but they are eaten by Africans who live in Europe. As the Minister of Agriculture for Italy, do you see this as your particular portfolio there? And if it is, will you, in the Council of Ministers, be pushing for tougher restrictions, etc., in other member states? If another member state, for example, the UK, is starting to do something about it, will it find itself subject to EU rules, etc.? The other thing I want to ask about are eggs produced in battery cages. Can you put your hand on your heart, please, and say that in Italy, no more laying hens are kept in battery cages? And if that is the case, are you prepared to investigate the rumours, and they're pretty strong rumours, that hens are laying eggs in battery cages in Eastern Europe in fairly large numbers? Are you intending to do anything about that? Thank you. Chairman, please notice 1 minute 15 seconds.
17, dziękuję.
17. Thank you very much. And now, as announced, I would like to ask the Minister to reply to these first statements of the coordinators. Minister, you have the floor. And then we will have further questions from the floor.
Thank you very much for the points you've made and the questions. Let me get to the basic issues here. First of all, on the basic issue of implementation of the Act on Planting Rights, I assure you I will give it the greatest attention, and so will the Presidency, to make sure that the political agreement we have reached will be implemented. On fruit and milk in schools, I agree with the point made. We're talking about an initiative which is essentially all about educating people, and so it would be a good thing to focus our attention once again on that approach. On the negotiations, especially the TTIP or TTIP negotiations, I think that we really should look for the opportunities that this possible agreement might bring with it for Europe. But we should not hide from the downside, the problems. But I do think that we need to continue to try to work in a positive manner on this. It's sensitive, yes, but it can be positive too. There's room there to improve the potential that Europe can gain from a strategic agreement like this one. I'm not hiding from the problems, but I do think that it's an opportunity, and I hope that we can all think of it that way and think about how to bring out the positive aspects. Now, on milk, as you said, great attention to this the dairy industry, especially now that will be withdrawing the quotas from next year. So we need to research on the market, do research on the market and on the effect on it of the Russian embargo. We've done so for August with the Commission, and we've also had a positive approach with Parliament. We have the right instruments which have already been put to use. The package, as I see it, needs to be managed and monitored in order to find a way to improve it. It's not, the game's not over with what we've done up to now. My first duty will be to guarantee, to ensure that the situation is monitored step by step and to see what we can do to support our farmers. That's the approach that we have taken with the Commission, Commissioners, Prime Ministers, everyone. Now, a question was put to me on seeds, and in response to this, let me say that the Italian presidency will take account of the concerns expressed by Parliament on the subject, but only after the Commission has come up with the amended version of its proposal to take account of the new situation in the sector. We've decided to continue with working parties in Council and resume debate, taking into account the concerns expressed by Parliament and Member States. I think that's all.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie ministrze.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now we shall start to listen to the statements from the floor. 1 minute per person. Mr. Buonanno.
Pan poseł Buonanno.
Signor Ministro.
Thank you and good morning, Minister. You spoke about the young farmers that we have to help. I'm over here. I'm rather small, so you may not have seen me. Yes, but he's wasting my time here, this man. Okay, this morning I submitted an oral amendment on rice, but for a because of a bureaucratic reason we turned into a defence of Europe and its mandarins, and that's what we were doing instead of defending the rice farmers against Asian imports. So, we have all these people who are dressed up as Europeans, but what they really are is Cambodians and Thais and other kinds of Asians. There's a lot of these people here. On the Russian embargo, may I just say that we're stupid, you are stupid, in quotes, because if you spend 125 million euros, and that's not enough to help the farmers who are suffering from the Russian embargo, then you're throwing that money away. If you'd followed a different policy with Russia and with Putin, you could have used that money for something else. If that's, Europe's idea of being smart, well, we're in trouble.
Mr. Kalniete.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to speak in English because I just discovered that there is no Latvian translation. European farmers are very hardly hit by the Russian embargo. And in Latvia, the consequence of embargo is particularly hard on dairy sector. Prices are down by 30 to 40%. If we convert in price, it's 19 cents per liter, which is beyond the cost of production cost. Also, milk producers' companies are suffering because the Russian market is closed. Latvian farmers have fulfilled 99.1% of their milk quota. And cow is not a machine. You can't just stop and switch it out. It continues to produce milk. And for that reason, I would ask European Agriculture Council to decide not to penalize farmers for exceeding their milk quotas. This is not only economic decision. In the face of such disaster, it is also a political decision. Thank you.
Pan poseł Dorfman.
Mr. Dorfman.
Grazie, signor Ministro.
Thank you. On milk, I agree with you, but I mean it was obvious what was going to happen when we abandoned quotas. The areas that are better off will have an advantage, and the peripheral regions and the mountainous regions, the more difficult ones, will lose out. Now, solutions have been proposed, and I think that they should be opposed. It's not just enough to monitor what's happening. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to something else. In the coming months, under the Italian presidency, we will have important decisions in ICANN on the protection of internet domains for domain names and the right to hold domain names for .line and so on. Now, is the presidency concerned about this? We get the impression that nobody in the Commission is dealing with it, and things are not going very well. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję. Pan poseł.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brannan, then Dodds, and then Tarabla. Mr. Brannan.
It was to pick up on the Chair's opening remarks. Given that your colleague Federica Mogherini has been appointed as the High Representative for Foreign Affairs, I think it might be useful for the committee to know, have you got a good working relationship with her? It may be that politically in the past you had a fallout, it would be useful to know, or do you work well together? Clearly, it shouldn't be the case that EU foreign policy is dictated by EU agriculture policy, but it would be useful if EU foreign policy was informed by EU agriculture policy, which is something that you would hopefully enable us to do. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję. Pan poseł.
Thank you, Mr. Dodds. Mrs. Dodds.
We have talked a little bit about the dairy sector, and Minister, you mentioned it in passing that you would monitor the situation. Let me give you some facts on behalf of farmers and dairy processors in Northern Ireland. Farmers are seeing a continuous drop in milk prices, and just yesterday the Fonterra auction was down 6%. Feeding into this are a number of factors which will lead to a perfect storm for farmers and milk processors. Global milk output has grown by 5 to 7%. Market demand has not matched this. The Russian ban on imports, particularly in Northern Ireland, my constituency, is affecting cheese and butter very, very much. And this will undoubtedly convert into skim and powder, which will further compound the price problem. And all of this at a time when Europe is about to lift quota restrictions. We can welcome the intervention so far, but it is not enough. Private storage aid is welcome. The intervention price is too low and does not reflect the market situation. We need to be looking at export refunds, and perhaps we need also to be thinking the unthinkable and actually having a serious conversation about the effects of the lifting of quota restrictions, and maybe even considering easing that into the market system rather than a one-for-all event. Thank you.
Microphone to the speaker, please.
Thank you. Just 1 minute of questions. The first of these on sugar. The 2006 reform caused a lot of restructuring in Europe's sugar production, the industry. Some types of production were moved from some areas, and because of agreements we have with a lot of less developed countries, ACP countries, the Balkans, as a result of these agreements we have to import tens of thousands of tons here, hundreds of thousands there. And, what is your position on that, which is a very specific industry and in terms of change? Secondly, Parliament rejected, before the elections, the marketing of vegetable reproductive matter, seeds in other words, There was a regulation from the Commission with 12 directives in it, and we rejected it. What will the Presidency think about it under your leadership? Will you be rejecting it too, or will you be working on it? It's important for us to know what you think about that. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję za dyscyplinę. Pan poseł.
Thank you for being disciplined, Mr. Kuzmiuk, and then Mr. Risotto. Thank you, Minister. Unfortunately, you did not refer to Mr. Wojciechowski's question, that is, why the presidency so far has not attempted to mobilize the reserve for losses from the common agriculture policy. I think the embargo actually affects all 28 member states, and we all know that the 125 million euros that were used by the Commission is absolutely insufficient to actually cover the losses, especially since compensating these losses now only pertains to two cases. That is, if some of the crops is used for charity purposes or destroyed. And the problem resulting from the embargo is just low prices for basically all agricultural products. Some of them are below production cost. So only using this reserve would be actually an adequate solution to the scale of the problem. Thank you. Thank you. Next person, please. Next speaker.
Yes.
Thank you. Like you, I've just got here from Italy. I'm from the Venice region, and of course the agriculture is of great importance to us in the food industry. But I was expecting something more practical from you, and I didn't get that, you know. We really need a more practical approach. I have three questions for you. I'm hoping for practical answers. Talking about the agri-food industry, why don't you talk about the fact that we have got cheap goods from the whole of the world on our tables when we produce quality goods, and we don't know enough about how and where they're produced? They, on the other hand, these other countries, they are blocking our agricultural produce, including wine. On this fruit being affected badly, and there's, we need some action here. The Russian embargo, you've been far too timid in responding to it. We need more compensation because the amounts set aside for this are nowhere near enough, even in our part of Italy. We need to, if there's to be more sanctions against Russia, I'd like to know what you think about it. It's an absurd decision by the European Union.
Madam Moy.
Okay. Allora, signor Ministro.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, you made a fine speech, but as usual, you talked about marketing, the right produce, and so on for the Italian presidency, but in reality, agriculture is in a terrible state in Italy. And what do you intend to do, especially to protect biodiversity, which is part of Italy's and Europe's heritage? Where you seem to be in favour of approving the TTIPs in lock, stock and barrel, and what do you want to do to protect farmers who produce in southern Europe, who are fighting against agreements that you yourself signed in favour of Moroccan produce, which is being sold at knockdown prices in Europe, coming into Europe with no inspections on quality or on the quantity of pesticides used. Farmers of southern Europe are on their knees. They don't, you have created this situation. What do you intend to do to protect them? And I'd also like to know what you intend to do to prevent the fraud which keeps on happening in Italy with vaccines to protect animals against various diseases.
Thank you. Mr. D'Amato and then Mr. Flanagan. Mr. D'Amato, you have the floor.
Yes, hello. I have a question about what's been happening with olives and a bacteria that's attacking them, and it's supposed to be quarantine arrangements for this according to EU legislation, and we're supposed to uproot all the trees. But you know, Minister, that it hasn't been proven that this bacteria is the only cause of the problems. There are other organisms, fungal organisms, insects and so on, that are involved in the process, and you know, there doesn't seem to be anything happening to reduce the use of pesticides. And what we need is an independent expert study involving experts in the environment as well. There are many people complaining about this. It's a real popular movement, and I want to know whether you intend to continue to go down this path. And I'd like to call your attention to all of these activities that are damaging our ecosystems as we head for a completely industrial agriculture system. What about the excellence of our made in Italy produce?
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan. Then Mr. Yar. Mr. Flanagan, you have the floor.
In relation to the European market for timber, in Ireland evidence has been presented to your counterpart with allegations of price manipulation which has been ignored. €85 million has been mentioned. Will you raise this issue with your counterpart Simon Coveney, or Minister for Agriculture, when you meet him in your job over the coming months? Because it is a market across the whole of the European Union, and no doubt further, and if there is price manipulation going on, or allegations of it, I think it needs to be investigated by the European Union, because there is no appetite to investigate it in the Republic of Ireland.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Yar, and then Ms. Hazekamp.
Thank you very much. I would not like to repeat what my colleagues have said, but I'd just like to put a brief question on price reductions in the context of the Russia embargo. Of course, it would have been better to stimulate domestic demand in Europe with school milk and school fruit, both of which have been mentioned. But hasn't the time come, given this state of affairs, to de-bureaucratise both of these programmes? In my region, we complain an awful lot about red tape. Many schools are simply not applying the programme for that reason. I wonder whether we couldn't just simplify the whole programme, get more milk, more fruit into schools by cutting red tape. It would help people's health, and it would also, I think, be essential in order that to de-bureaucratise it.
Thank you, Mrs. Hazekamp, and then Mr. Rope.
Thank you. And thank you to the Minister for a very detailed presentation on the programme of work. I was struck by the fact that you didn't mention animal welfare. Strange, because there are millions of people who protect animals in Europe and are waiting for something from you. Let me mention one point. Every day we see these overloaded trucks, overloaded with animals from the Netherlands, for example, are all over Europe and further afield. Every day these trucks loaded with living pigs are driven to Italy, and there, of course, they will be turned into Parma ham and sent back to Holland. And this causes an awful lot of suffering among animals, and we really need to tackle this. And many animals, and those who would protect them, are hopefully looking to you for something to be done about this. Can you do something about transport times for livestock and other regulations relating to animal welfare? Thank you.
Dziękuję pani poseł, pan poseł Rope.
Thank you, Mr. Rope, and then Mr. Valakarsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Minister, I'm really sorry that you didn't answer to the question from the Polish colleague concerning the African swine fever. I do understand that it is an important question for you. I'm from the area where recently a big pig farm was closed because of African swine fever and 20,000 pigs were killed. It's really a terrible shock and a terrible future for the farmers. Russia has prohibited imports of pig meat from Lithuania, even though wild boars that have this infection arrive to Lithuania from Russia and Belarus, and we have sources of this infection. We have new sources of this infection. This is a very important question. There are many speculations where the African swine fever came from. Maybe it was due to the feed, not only to wild boars. So it is very important that this question is included in your agenda and preventive means are taken, because the problem will only increase. Thank you.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. 2 questions, Minister, for you. The first, I'd like to know your opinion on the Spanish request to extend the support, the aid for the distribution of fruit and milk in schools, and also table olives to be included in that. The other one is very urgent, that for the European Union to be able to extend the agreed extension of aid, to people who are suffering very badly in the fruit sector, which of course unfortunately is being affected by the Russian embargo. I think it would be a good idea if you could negotiate the opening up of new markets in non-member countries and the removal of the phytosanitary barriers put up by countries like the United States, and that would help us find alternatives to Russia. We'd like to see new initiatives against Russia as well at the WTO, and campaigns to promote European produce. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilera Garcia.
Thank you, and welcome, Minister. Could I briefly put a few questions to you? In the 2020 strategy, one of the underlying themes is the incorporation of young people into farming. And what have you done about this in the CAP reform? Second point, I'm not in favour of the association agreements because they never take any account of the harsh impact on the very harsh impact on certain parts of the EU, and this is happening in Andalusia with the Moroccan association agreement. I don't think it should be allowed to go ahead without compensatory measures. Briefly on the Russian embargo, the Council's proposal, the Commission's proposal rather, fails to include such important types of fruit as melon and watermelon. And another effect, as Mr. Valcarcel said, citrus fruits are not affected, and squash as well. And I'm concluding now. And there are knock-on effects throughout the fruit and vegetable industry. So that's really hopelessly inadequate. And, you know, it's a big mistake to make it end on the 30th of November.
Dziękujemy bardzo. Prosimy pana ministra.
Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you. I'll try to pick up on each point. I'm sorry if I have to be so brief. On rice, all of the Council of Agriculture Ministers is focused on this issue. We discussed it just last week. this specific point. It's not just our initiative either, and we asked the Commission not just to monitor closely how this develops, but we've also raised the problem and suggested that the Commission should study the implementation of the safeguard clause. So we're working on that. It's of the greatest importance as far as I'm concerned. You can be sure of that. And I'd like to thank you for raising that, because this too is something that we have tried to tackle just last week. In fact, it was on the agenda and we discussed it with the Commission in July as well. That was our first approach on the question of domain names and the very sensitive issues around this topic. I too think we should do more about this. The Commission has, I've already said so to the Commission, and we are awaiting progress because this is an area that's new in some ways, but it's of vital strategic importance to agriculture, European agriculture. On the African swine fever, I'd like to assure you that the Presidency will focus on this at its greatest attention. We'll be talking about it in the next few days with Commissioner Borg, and not just him. This is a new issue that has come up just towards the end of August. But I would like to reassure you we are paying close attention to it. There was also the issue of Xylella, the olive bacteria. It's a very specific issue, and we are working on that too. In Italy to put together an operation that will seriously limit the impact of this on milk. Raised a number of times, a very sensitive issue, of course. The dairy package does give us considerable opportunities in a lot of ways to improve the way the industry works. What we have to do is to make progress, practical progress in the coming weeks and months in understanding how we can manage the opportunities that are here. The changes that are in prospect may have an impact on some areas. I'm thinking of mountain areas in particular, or other underprivileged areas. So this, I think, offers some instruments in both the first and second pillar. So we have to see how each country intends to make use of those opportunities. Obviously, I can speak of the Italian case. In our national application of this measure, we have focused a lot of our action on that, and we've tried to take a close look at the opportunities offered by the new CAP. On the Russian crisis, let's call it that, let me say quite clearly that I don't think that the work we've done on this is completed. In the next few weeks, in the last few weeks, we have tried to reach agreement with ministers. Just in the last few days, in fact, we've been trying to improve some of the measures, and we'll be asking the Commission for practical measures to help the fruit trade and also the dairy trade. We've already made the first important step when it comes to powdered milk and cheese. Obviously, the finances available and the budget will, be an important part of that. We'll look at what's happened, and you can see what we've heard this morning. Obviously, ways and means are important here. Now, in the Commission too, we have to discuss this on Friday, in the Council, I'm sorry. We've got to look at means of improving these measures, strengthening them. I don't think the job is done. We said that to the Commission, but we did think that we had to get started. And we have done so with instruments that can be of help. Monitoring, yes, we don't have that. You will have to wait, analyse closely what's happening. We've got to have the data that will enable us to take action and develop instruments that will be effective. It's not just a way of wasting time, of waiting. Monitoring. It's a way of helping to defend our businesses, especially in this way. But we do need to improve the instruments we have available, and then we'll be talking to our fellow ministers on Monday. That's going to be a very important point. May I point out, by the way, that Council, this meeting with you will enable me to take to that meeting on Friday a lot of the important points of view I've heard this morning. Now, I can assure you that we have very good relations with Federica Mogherini. I know her well. We're aware of how serious and responsible she is in dealing with these topics, these issues, and we know what happened on Saturday. She's, gone from being foreign minister to being president in office, and obviously there's close links between the Russian embargo issue and its effect on the agri-food world in Europe, and she's very much aware of that. She in the Foreign Ministers' Council she raised the issue and there's a meeting on the 5th next Friday. We've prepared that with her. We in the Italian presidency have tried to keep everything together on this because we need people to be aware of the extent of the impact on agriculture. It's a very sensitive issue. And, please don't have any doubts. We can work very well together with Ms. Mogherini. Then on the agreement you mentioned with Morocco, that was entered into some years ago. We're aware of the sensitivity of the problems and difficulties that have arisen as a result of it in the fruit and vegetables sector. We now, obviously, but this agreement is part of a broader policy perspective. And I think that we'll have to take, you do need to take look at the big picture on this. We have to look at what we can do, what we probably will have to do. But, we need to focus on what matters. I think I've answered everything. Well, probably not everything, but I think that the important issues raised and brought to my attention have at least been discussed in greater depth. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękujemy.
Thank you very, very much. I think all the information that you got, all the questions that you got, will serve you well in order to raise these issues on Friday with the meeting on with the other agricultural ministers. So the faster we act, the larger the effects. Thank you very much, Minister. All the best in your role, and we keep our fingers crossed. And also thank you very much to the interpreters. I would like to ask you to thank them by applauding. And Mr. Minister, see you next time after a good presidency, which we wish to you and to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck. Good job. Yes, last 27 or 28 September. Okay. Oui, je sais, mais ça ne peut pas marcher pour cet après-midi.